I don't particularly want it to happen, but I think it should be talked about just to make something happen. We need a global strike of all seafarers because global change has never happened without something really bringing to the forefront the job or the role that seafarers do. Because while we continue to have seafarers who work in squalid, appalling conditions, while nobody's listening, while nobody in government stands up, nothing's going to change.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to the 165th episode of the Shipping Podcast. If you're here for the first time and you want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything, please follow the Shipping Podcast on your podcast platform of choice and become part of the tribe that gets to listen to new episodes as soon as they are released. We are approaching June 25th and the celebration of the Day of the Seafarer, which was celebrated for the first time in 2011. The Day of the Seafarer is a way to recognize the invaluable contribution that seafarers make to international trade and the world economy, often at a high personal cost to themselves and their families. This year, on the 10th anniversary of the Day of the Seafarer, IMO is calling for a fair future for seafarers. Their campaign discusses issues that will still be relevant to seafarers after the pandemic, such as fair treatment, fair working conditions, fair training, fair safety, and so on. Shining light on the seafarers seems even more important right now, when the rest of us are seeing the light in the tunnel of the pandemic. We are witnessing the spread of the virus going down, and we are getting in line to become vaccinated. For the seafarer, it's a totally different story. Not for all of them, but for many. These unsung heroes who have been making sure that the rest of us has been able to go to the store or sit at home shopping online, for them it's still a problem to travel from the ship to their homes or the other way around. Borders are still closed and governments have not realized that people working at sea need to be repatriated and vaccinated. Things are starting to brighten up, but still, there are cases where we need to shake up the rest of the world to join forces with us and give seafarers the respect that they have earned. One person has been a strong voice for the seafarers for a long time. Someone who is not afraid to speak his mind. I decided that I wanted to invite Frank Coles to the show and ask him about his view on a fair future for the seafarers. I'm not sure that neither you nor me want to hear what he has to say, but I give him credit for speaking up and being who he is. You do not have to doubt Frank Coles, a man with strong opinions. This is our conversation. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Frank Coles, formerly Group CEO of Wallem, and prior to that, CEO of Transas. Prior to that, head of Inmarsat's maritime business. And I've been in the industry now, 40 plus years, since I went to sea in 1978.
So you are a master mariner?
I am a master mariner. I was 12 years at sea in various shipping companies. Came ashore in, I think, 1989. Can't really remember. and went off to Cardiff University to get a master's degree in maritime law.
So why did you start in shipping? What got you into becoming a master mariner to start with?
That's an interesting question. It was a combination of things. I was born in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. So landlocked country, although I lived on a very, very large lake, Lake Kariba. But living in Rhodesia was great. It was a great place to grow up, but I wanted to see the world. And also my mother came from a naval family. I had 5 uncles in the Royal Navy. So that was kind of why I wanted to go and see the world, really, and becoming a master mariner was the way to do it.
The reason for me asking is that we are not that good at recruiting new people, young people into our industry. So I am always asking, how did you end up here? And the answer is usually either I grew up in a family where shipping was something, or I just went in here and threw a banana leaf. I just happened by accident to come into the maritime industry.
We're not great at recruiting, and I think why would you go to sea today? It's a very sad situation, I think. I was talking to a friend of mine just this week, actually, who I sailed with back in the early 80s. And my comment to him was, I wouldn't let my son go to sea, never mind my daughter, or I wouldn't want them to, because I think the conditions are worse today than they were when I was at sea. If one industry suffers from an abuse of human rights, it's the maritime industry. When I was at sea as a cadet, as an officer, I could go ashore, I could have a beer after watch, I could travel, I had accommodation that didn't look like a prison cell, I was fed well, and you had a process where the officer ashore treated you with respect, and complaints were dealt with properly. Today, for a large number of seafarers, you cannot go ashore. You cannot have any sort of alcohol at all. You live in poor conditions on board. You're poorly fed. Trying to go home for vacation or join a ship has become a real minefield of problems. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace.
You have been an advocate for the seafarers for a long time, and I don't know anyone that has been shouting so loud about the crew change problem during the pandemic. So is this the background in where you start your thought process about seafarers, or?
Yeah. Well, I just, the industry is about transporting goods, and obviously ship owners want to make money when they buy ships, and charterers want their cargoes delivered. And I understand those problems. But at Wallem in 2020, just watching the agony that was going through the crewing department, the agony that was going through the owners as they tried to juggle things with our crewing department. And that agony was nothing compared to the families. When will I go home? When can I join a ship? Oh, my mother's died of COVID. I can't go home. My wife is ill. But it just was appalling that countries and governments essentially swept aside the role that Seafarers was playing and made no attempt to facilitate the mental well-being of people who were delivering their goods, keeping them alive in a different kind of way. And this is to take nothing away from the medical profession or the other people who did work, but to just forget seafarers and just think about the way they were treated. I just found it appalling. So yes, I did shout loud. I want to find a way to do it in a successful way. Unfortunately, we are very, very good in the industry at shouting at each other. But nobody's listening outside, and that's the thing we have to figure out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that is why I started the podcast, because then I could reach a new audience. I could reach beyond my own bubble and just speaking to the same people who always knows better than I do anyhow.
But they don't know better, you see. They don't, but they only listen to what they listen to. And every industry and every government and every country has an establishment. And if you don't say what they want to hear, they put you down as a crazy, or they put you, even for me shouting, the industry, the establishment doesn't really want to hear it. There's too much patting each other on the back. The Neptune Declaration is, for me, just another piece of wasted effort, because it's done nothing, it's achieved nothing. I remember when, if I go back to mid last year, whenever it was, the British government had a meeting, and 14 countries in Europe or whatever it was came together. And I just said, this is another waste of time. And people were like, oh, it's a start. Well, where did it go? Absolutely nowhere.
So what do you want? Do you see any solutions to this? What do you want to be done? How can we make a change?
So, Lena, this is a really sensitive topic. I see all the discussion now is about vaccine. And that's great. You've got to have a vaccine. I've had 2 shots of Moderna. And I got it done as soon as I could. I think vaccine for seafarers is great. I live 10 miles from Port Canaveral, which when it's operating is the second biggest cruise port in the world. When I drive up there now, there are cruise ships coming in just to get their crew vaccinated, and then they turn around and they go out. The U.S. ports are Louisiana, Texas, Florida. They are vaccinating the foreign crews when they come in. This is fantastic. So now they're vaccinated and locked up on the ship, but they still can't go home. And if you're Indian, you are just forgotten about now. It's a disgrace. I decided to come home from Hong Kong in December, and tied to that was just watching. I realized that as Group CEO of Wallem, there was a line I couldn't cross in terms of shouting for seafarers. As a private individual at home, I can speak up. Lots of people called me when I came home and said, across the industry, and said, how can we help? So I said, well, my idea is this. And as soon as I told them my idea, they said, or at least one of my ideas, they said, you will never work in the industry again. If you promote that, I don't want anything to do with it. Now, I don't particularly, and I'm going to tell you what it is, but I don't particularly want it to happen. But I think it should be talked about just to make something happen. We need a global strike of all seafarers, because global change has never happened without something really bringing to the forefront the job or the role that seafarers do. Because while we continue to have seafarers who work in squalid, appalling conditions, while nobody's listening, while nobody in government stands up, nothing's going to change. It's not within my political feeling that people should strike. It's not something I want to do. But if you go back 100 years when we didn't have workers' rights, that's what unions were for. That's how strikes happened. And then we have changes. The Scandinavian countries have rights, and they're on a different level. If you go to some Eastern countries, they still continue to have very few workers' rights. I mean, how do we get change? We have to have, somebody has to stand up, some government, because we can't do it. And talking to each other in the industry is not going to do it. So somehow it has to be brought to the forefront of the industry, of the world. If Bloomberg, New York Times, CNN, I've spoken on all of them, they all run an article. But the article is not really about the seafarer being stuck. They mention that. It's about how much money you can get for the cost of copper and what ship rates are. And it's not about human rights. So we have to have something that really brings that to the fore.
And then what? I mean, we can't strike, or the seafarers can't strike forever. So, and then what?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't know that you even have to strike. You just need to bring it. Just the threat of it needs to bring it to a place. Because the truth is that the Boris Johnsons of this world, the Joe Bidens of this world, the world leaders, the EU, they could create a much more efficient passage for seafarers to go home and to get off ships after 6 months or whatever. But this wholesale behavior of, right, India's full of, COVID shut it off, no more Indian seafarers. You've got owners refusing Indian seafarers today. You've got charterers refusing to hire ships if the crew is due a crew change. Now, why are they doing that? Because there's no systems in place. So the easiest way to do is just say no. We don't want Indian seafarers because they can't go home. We don't want you to do a crew change when your ship is chartered by us because it's too complicated. It costs too much. You have to divert. You want to do this. And I don't really care what any of them say. Even the big guys who say, oh, we don't put that clause in the charter party, absolute rubbish. We all know they're doing it. But that's, the establishment's closed up shop and nobody's talking about it now because the rates are great. So it has to get to government. We can't keep shouting at each other. So how do you get it to government? You have to get it to a level where people take notice.
So I believe you must have been thinking about what will the new system look like if you want to scrap the old system that is in place right now.
What do you mean? What is the old system?
You just said we have a system that doesn't work, and that's why it continues like it has always done. So what is the future then? What do we need to change into?
Well, we need to get rid of the IMO, or we need to make the IMO something different that has teeth. Because, they've spoken, the IMO's has spoken about this matter. The IMO's raised this matter, but to no avail. Nobody's listening to them, really. I mean, they're proving to be almost pointless in the environmental debate as well, because we've got no direction. We're in the middle of an ammonia, hydrogen, LNG discussion. And people like Bjorn Holgaard of Anglo Eastern brings up nuclear, which I think is a fantastic idea, especially with sea salt fusion. Now you're shaking your head. You see, you disagree. So, but I'm diverting. It just needs a system that led by the people who can actually enforce, because seafarers, ship owners, people in the shipping industry can't influence border control. They can't influence who comes in and out. They can't influence, but governments can. And, number of other people in the industry just as concerned as me, like Rajuni and Rajesh Uni and others, have all suggested various channels for seafarers to go. But it doesn't actually come to anything because Rajesh, just like me and many, many others, doesn't have the influence we can't get the attention of someone at the level where this needs to be put in place. At the end of the Second World War, we needed to feed Berlin. So the Americans put it in the channel and off they did, and they did it. Well, you could do the same with the seafarers. You can get the seafarers home just like you can get your cargo. But it's not up to the captains and the majors in the army. It's up to the generals and the government. So we need the governments to, and the only way to make the government listen is to hurt them or make them realize, because, maybe one of them will hear this and say that crackpot's got crackpot Coles has got a good point. Maybe I should try and do something about it. But seafarers don't have votes, so most of them don't actually care.
Well, I mean, it's a global system. It's the same with any other UN body. You need to have the members, and the members are the countries and the governments. So it's boils down to that the governments do not know anything about the maritime industry. And that goes back to us, I think, in a way, because we are not good enough in explaining and marketing our industry as a whole, what we do, and that we are the backbone of trade, global trade and globalization and all of that we already know, but they seem to forget, at least from time to time. Some countries have shipping ministers or in Sweden we got transport minister, but he is also in charge of roads and airlines and everything. So then it's harder to have an opinion about the maritime industry as such. And we are so passionate about it. So how can we pull together to explain? I mean, I think that is one of the reasons we need to raise the profile of the maritime industry as a whole. And in the maritime industry, there are also seafarers working. Otherwise, I don't really see how we can just try and turn over the entire IMO.
I mean, it's not about turning over the IMO because they have a role. They need to be more efficient, though. There needs to be a better way to do it because it's bureaucracy gone mad. You didn't do this. You're not talking to me because you thought I was going to make all these nice comments, but I just think it's crazy. And the unfortunate thing is that COVID has shown you that for all this discussion about globalization, every country took its own position on whether its borders should be closed, who could come in, who could go out, and any thought of a global approach to the pandemic was thrown out the window. Now, all the crazies would like to blame Trump, but it's not really. It wasn't his. Australia made their own rules, closed shop, still closed. New Zealand made their own rules, lots of the islands, and I mean, fair enough to a point. But Australia was requiring. Certain states in Australia were requiring owners to charter airplanes to fly seafarers because they would contaminate the people. I mean, this is a disgrace. So countries have to work together. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be down to the leadership of the countries and the leadership. The United States really could change this. And that's why I'm really impressed that we're doing these vaccines for foreign seafarers when they arrive. And it's actually fantastic. If the United States is prepared to vaccinate the seafarers, then they also should be a driving force behind seafarers coming in here who are over their time. They should be a driving force in providing flights and enabling seafarers to be changed out. Because it's a human rights issue, it's a mental welfare issue, it's a safety issue. But when you've got countries and owners and people who refuse to have Indians, it's ludicrous. They can be vaccinated, they can be taken care of, they can be quarantined just like everyone else. But it just seems to me the further east we've gone with looking for cheap labor, the worse we've treated seafarers. Now, if you think, a Norwegian or a Swedish seafarer would never put up with it, or a Brit or anything, or an American, but it's okay if we just keep going further and further east and just treat them worse and worse. I mean, it's a scandal upon our industry, but it's also a scandal upon the world leadership. So you think it's about marketing the industry. I don't think marketing is going to do it. We talk about marketing all the time, but with 60,000 ships and 1.5 million seafarers, we may have a large impact, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to the voters of the United States, or the number of cars on the roads, or the influence in Washington of the lobbyists. We don't have a lobby. I mean, the maritime industry in the United States, for instance, we're having discussions in this country about the infrastructure, and yet we do nothing about. We could, with all the rivers we have here, and with all the, we could do a huge thing to take a lot of the pollution off the roads, but maritime just doesn't figure, just not at a level it should be anyway. So you say marketing, I say, we need to hurt them, and then maybe they'll listen.
Well, I don't say marketing like a marketing campaign that people are trying to sell to you. It's more like, we are so many that we could carry the message ourselves, in a way. But we need to get the ears of the people who are deciding. That is my point. So I'm not thinking about the marketing campaign like, here's a picture of a ship, because that doesn't help the seafarer. But I did an interview. I'm not expecting that you listen to my interviews, but I did an interview with a guy from IBM about the digital vaccine pass.
Yeah.
Because that is the next step. It's the WHO, that is also another UN body that is deciding, the global standard for a digital vaccine pass. But it's the individual nations that sets up the rules for fulfilling that digital pass. So we are back to square one. We need to sell, market, explain to our governments. What does the seafarers do? What is the maritime industry? How do we contribute to society? Otherwise, we will continue to do the same thing over and over again, coming back, explaining, forget, go back.
No, I totally agree. I mean, as for digital vaccines, I think it's digital passports, vaccine passports. I mean, I agree with you. But I think in the end, seafarers will end up benefiting from the fact that people want to go on holiday and businessmen will want to travel. And airlines will want to make money, and airlines have more influence than we do. And passengers, travelers, and have more influence. So one hopes that through that, we will get a cohesive, organized, global response to what a vaccine passport should look like.
But still, it's a UN body that decides, and they had no jurisdiction over nations.
It is a UN body, but like, if certain countries, like the US and others, if they apply enough pressure, the rules will get done. Let's not kid ourselves. I think the EU's made a complete mess of the vaccine from what I read, but at least the EU talking about the environment has got the IMO working a bit faster, because they realize that somebody else will do something if they don't do it. So, if the EU was to put a policy in place tied to Schengen, then you can show something. Okay, if you're vaccinated and you're in Schengen and blah, 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 then you can show the way to do it.
I think they are working on that, and I think actually Germany has got the lead on that one.
Again, somebody takes the lead, but it has to be a government. I will say Europe has not been too bad to seafarers, because you've been able to do crew changes in Rotterdam, and Denmark has been helpful, and a lot of these things. The UK hasn't been terrible, but there's another problem, and I find it appalling. Try and get a Schengen visa, or try and get an US visa to travel. Why do seafarers have to do this? It should be enough that you have a seafarer's pass and you can put in place proper travel, because they are flying all the time. They're going home all the time. But no, the US embassies have been closed for over 12 months now. You can't get a visa. So what happens? So that makes crew change even harder here. And the same for trying to do crew change in Europe. But the problem is the ships keep sailing, the crew keeps sitting on board, and they keep delivering. And no one's talking about how many people have committed suicide. No one's talking about these seafarers who are doing 17, 18 months on board. No one's talking about any of the problems that are going on. And it doesn't help when old seafarers put in columns, oh, well, in my day, I did 2 years at sea. Yeah, well, in your day, you had a month alongside and you had girlfriends in every port and you were partying all the time and you didn't. It's a completely different environment.
Yes, it is. And in a way, it must be better. And we can make it better.
But how do we make it better? Like I said to you, you've got to get to the right people. And if you're not in the establishment, they close up shop and they don't want to listen. And a lot of changes have happened. We see in the US now, it's very unfortunate with the divisiveness and by divisiveness everywhere. But, we get the divisiveness. We get a lot more discussion about race and a lot more discussion about lives. And how's it happened? It's actually happened from violence. And I'm not advocating violence, of course, it's terrible. But marching and raising the profile. And I go back to, if all ships stop working for a week or two, we'd soon get some action.
We got a lot of action, at least a lot of attention, when we had the Suez Canal thing.
Yeah. We did.
We got attention from everywhere, but maybe not the right attention to the crew, because I felt for them.
Yeah. And what was the discussion about? Oh, world trade has been blocked by the Suez Canal. That kind of supports my point, that you stop world trade, they'll all listen. And it's a complete nonsense, that whole thing. No one's talking about the fact that those pilots come on board and all they want is cigarettes and they're completely distracted and they threaten to not sail your ship. And now they've got the temerity to hold the ship and say that it was all the crew's fault. It's an absolute disgrace. The Egyptians, I probably won't be able to ever go to Egypt again, but we all know that the pilot was too busy arguing for his cigarettes or not paying attention. But,
he's not here to defend himself. Can I say that?
No, that's right. He's not here to defend himself. But you've already got the owners saying that, never mind. We'll probably get off.
So what would make you recommend your sons to go to sea? What would that look like? You said that you would never, ever let them go to sea.
I couldn't control it. My sons or daughters, right? It shouldn't be about sons or daughters. It should be about people. If it was a career that you could see where you would be treated with respect, with a clear path, and human rights would be respected, then it's okay. This is a career you should follow. Of course, it doesn't help when we talk about automation and unmanned ships, and there's no clarity in that direction. And, I've run a lot of technology businesses in the maritime industry. And I think the use of automation is very smart. And I can see a day when more automation on board and remote operation or more collaboration with the ship and the shore will come. Ironically, that could be a way to revive the shipping industry as a career for people, because owners, governments, charterers will all realize that you need qualified people, and qualified people will not go work in a shitty environment. So you need to do something about providing, I'm not saying a Google-like funhouse, but at least a professional environment where you respect the qualities of the analysts and the quality of the operators and the quality of the people. Because today, we all respect our captains and our seafarers, whether they be oilers or captains or chief engineers. But they don't get the same respect as an airplane captain, for instance. So it's respect, isn't it? What would make me tell my grandchildren they should go to sea? Respect. or even enter the industry, because we have sea blindness, as some people like to say. But I wouldn't recommend. I loved the sea. I loved it. I loved going away to sea. My longest voyage was 8 months, not 17. That was out of choice. But in my 8 months, I went ashore. Sometimes we were alongside for a week at a time. I had a fantastic time. We were in LA, then we were in Vancouver, then we were in Tokyo, then we were in Philippines, then we were, fantastic on that ship. But and I went home when my son was due to be born. Compare that to what the chief officer of the ship today would have to say. I missed the birth of my son. I haven't been ashore in 8 months. I don't know when I'm going home. Oh, and I'm Indian, so I probably won't be allowed home until COVID's over. There's no respect. So the only way to recommend the sea as a career is if we bring back respect.
Well, we are approaching the Day of the Seafarer, where IMO has proclaimed the fair future for seafarers. So what is your view on a fair future for seafarers?
A fair future is one where there is certainty of how long you're joining for. A fair future is one where you can see a career down the path, and one where there is no way to get out of paying you. There is no way to get out of feeding you properly. And you know that when your time is up, you will go home. And you know that there is some way for you to come ashore and at least get some mental health breaks. Because at the end of the day, they would stay at sea longer if there was a form of mental health relief. Because that's what going ashore was during your trip. That was your mental health relief. And that's what it really boils down to. In many ways, when I was at sea, of course, we only towards the end of it did we have any sort of satellite communications. Today, they have too much communications, or at least some people would say they have too much. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it brings a different level of pressure, always knowing what's going on at home, because it can interfere. But it's like everything, isn't it? Everything in moderation is a good thing. Too much of anything is a bad thing, except maybe happiness. But no one gets too much happiness.
So is there anything that you are content with? I mean, is there anything that you think, wow, this is progress in the maritime industry?
God, you make me sound like I'm a miserable old man.
Yes, you sound like that yourself.
Well, is there anything I'm content with? It's really depressing. It's really depressing to realize that from going to sea in May of 1977, 78, whenever it was, and actually seafarers' rights have gone backwards. That's quite depressing. I mean, maybe for people in Western Europe or seafarers in the Americas, but overall as an industry, we've left the seafarer behind. And you want me to be happy about it?
I didn't say you were going to be happy, but I said there must be something that is keeping you getting out of bed in the morning.
No, I think the movement of technology is really exciting. I think it's really exciting, and I've been a part of that. Unfortunately, our approach to it could be better because, there is a lot of innovation. There's a lot of smart guys and girls working on this stuff. There's a lot of startups. Unfortunately, we go back to, it's 60,000 ships and 1 million seafarers, and you're not going to have the scale. Many of these startups are just going to go nowhere because of the scale of the industry, and we can't. So inevitably, and unfortunately, I'm seeing more and more private equity become interested in doing roll-ups of the small startups, and hopefully we'll come to a place where we get the right solution. I think change is coming. I mean, technology is really, really exciting. And I think the discussion about the environment and the discussion about what fuels for tomorrow is really exciting. My own view is that salt fusion, nuclear type stuff is 100% the way to go. 100% the way to go. I wonder about the future of ship management companies in their current form. I believe that you'll see down the road, you'll see the big companies like Wärtsilä, ABB, MAN, and the shipyards like Hyundai will control the engine technology monitoring side of the industry. And you won't need technical management because it'll be done by them, like Rolls-Royce. And ship management companies will be reduced to crewing operations, supplying crew to the extent they exist. Because you may have crew, your crew may look more like IT consultancy companies that are providing the core analytics, providing the core crew. You'll still need your maintenance crews. So I think technology is going to change that face. And how quickly it happens, I don't know. But all of this needs to be driven by, and I come back to, charterers. Charterers can do it. They won't do it because charterers' modus is to have the cheapest mode of transport, not the safest, whereas they could really control the narrative in terms of technology. They could control the narrative in terms of the environment. They could control the narrative in terms of the fuels if they said, we will only charter these kinds of ships. And they better watch out if Amazon comes in. So, yeah, I'm positive about technology. I love technology. And it could make things so much more clean, so much more efficient. And they could provide a role for the human in the shipping industry, just not the traditional roles that exist today.
So what do you do nowadays?
Well, I haven't actually done anything for the last 5 or 6 months. I've been basically on gardening leave from Wallem. And I've been taking time to just read the articles, look what's going on in the industry without speaking up, without saying anything. And I've been thinking a lot about this crew problem and a lot about technology. What am I going to do next? I'm not sure. I'm sure something will come up. I've done a few little consults on technology things. I've had conversations with people about the crew industry and what direction. There's a lot of opportunities. I'm just not sure which opportunity fits me best at this point.
You're being very secretive. I understand that. No problem at all.
I'm not being secretive. I just haven't decided, to be perfectly honest.
But you're not leaving us, are you?
I'm not sure.
We need your controversial figure still in the industry.
You think so, do you? Do you think that?
Yeah.
Why? Why do you think that's important? I mean,
because there is no one else.
There's other people who speak up.
No, not like you do.
And you don't think they just think I'm crazy or just...
No.
Really? Okay. That's nice to hear. I think it's important to speak up. It doesn't... And I also don't think you need to agree with each other all the time.
No, that makes it more interesting if you don't.
Yeah. But we need to listen to everyone's opinion instead of just... And this is where I've become a little dispirited is I see the establishment just closing shop. So if they have a meeting about crew, it's the International Chamber of Shipping and it's the IMO and it's a bunch of the old boys clubs. And they don't want to listen to someone like me because I'm going to say something controversial. So they just don't invite you.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. And that's sad because if they really were honest about change, then they would involve the outspoken. They would involve the people who come from the left side of the field, not just the people who sit in their room with their jackets and ties and nod and agree with them. Because if these people really want change, they would also entertain the people who put outspoken ideas and speak up.
Yeah.
Because you need to this is what disruption's about. It needs something different.
they're all talking about collaboration and breaking down the silos and so on, but they continue to work in silos.
That's right. It's disappointing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to name names because that's not the way to do it at this point. But I've tried to reach out in the back channels, but they don't want. You can't rock the boat. It's more important for people to. At the end of the day, they still have their own lobby. So the suit brigade doesn't want to have anybody rock the boat, and you need to be ready to listen to the rock the boat crowd, and we need to find it. We need to do something different, because if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. I'd like to find a way into Washington, because if I can find a way into Washington, and if I can reach the right person, I'd like to think that, well, I know the US has the ability. It's whether we can find someone who has the desire to make a difference. Because if the United States Coast Guard wanted something done, it could be done. And it could certainly be done in the United States, and a lot of people would follow suit. And if they didn't follow it exactly, at least you would have the Coast Guard doing one thing, Europe doing another, and others would be forced to follow. Because if Australia, the EU, and the US put in place something, you've covered most of the bases outside of the Far East.
But that is what I'm asking you. What do we want to put together? How can we make it better? That is my point.
Well, Lina, what do we want? We want something where there's clear rules about how to fly here to there. We want something where there are clear rules about how you come in and how you go out. Not 50 different countries with 50 different rules. And the crewing department of Wallem, and I know it was the same at the other ship management companies because we've talked to them, but in 2020, they worked ridiculous hours just trying to find routes home for crew, because this country had that rule, that country had that rule, that airline had that rule. You could get out of this country, but you couldn't get into that country. You could get into that country, but you couldn't get out of that country. It was crazy. In China, you couldn't do crew changes except for Chinese. And then you had the owner screaming at you that you were wasting their money and you were doing this. And everybody was under this huge pressure. I was accused by a ship owner of trying to incite a mutiny because the ship diverted to get the crew off. I mean, it's complete madness. But if you had a set of rules and where countries had a channel for seafarers, we get all this discussion about name seafarers as essential workers. Well, 20 countries have done it already. What does that actually mean? It doesn't mean anything. There needs to be meat on the bones of all of this discussion. Yes, they can be. So nurses are essential workers. It didn't do anything. I mean, we can call these people whatever we want. It's an absolute disgrace. Look at the discussions gone on recently about increasing the salaries of seafarers. You look at the number, it's going up by $2 or something stupid. Please. What do we want? We want a more robust infrastructure of rules where if you are a country that benefits from seafarers bringing cargo to your shores and taking cargo from your shores, you are forced to respect the rights by which they are treated, are able to come in and out and go home, and have some form of recreation.
And then what?
Well, but what do you mean, and then what? At least see.
Because you started by saying that the accommodation is bad and the food is bad and everything else is bad. So once the COVID is over, what do we want then?
I mean, I'm sure it's not that on every single ship, right? It cannot be. It's not like that on every single ship. But you only hear about the bad all the time. I mean, I like to think Wallem ships, Anglo-Eastern ships, ships, many reputable ownerships. It's not like that. But even on reputable shipping company ships, you can't get your seafarer home.
No. So we're talking about two different things. So one thing is the crew change thing, and the other one is a fair future for seafarers, which is then, what does it look like? It looks like...
Well, the fair future for seafarers, let's just ignore COVID for the time being. Let's ignore this getting them home and everything. The role of Port State Control and the role of RightShip and these other organizations is all admirable, but it needs to have not so much maybe RightShip, but certainly Port State Control or both. There needs to be more enforcement, stronger enforcement of those who abuse the system. Because, your ship gets visited in whichever port, they do an inspection, all ships have problems, but, then you need to have fair maintenance budgets as well. But if you want the owner to have fair maintenance budgets, then you need to pay them fairly for their ship. So that's a revolving, but that'll only come from enforcement and that'll only come from inspection. And in truth, it's the charterers who can really make a difference there. We can't expect government to monitor, maintain, and otherwise we then talk about something which I don't like, which is big government control.
So we're back to charterers.
Yeah, and they won't like me for that. But we are back to charterers.
So maybe we should disrupt them then.
Well, that's what happens when you stop the ships. But yeah. Yes, we disrupt charterers. I do think now not all charterers are bad either, right? But it is true that they have the power to decide which ship they put their cargo on, and they have the power to decide who they charter from, and they could make the decision they wouldn't charter from a diesel ship that pumps out all this kind of rubbish, or they could decide they wouldn't charter a ship that has scrubbers, or they could decide that they wouldn't charter a ship that has a crew that's done more than 6 months on board, all that kind of thing. But we need to be able to help them facilitate that, because you can't say no ship will have a crew that's done more than 6 months if there's no way for the owner to get them home. So it's a bigger problem than just blaming the charterers for everything.
No, but they could be the key to something instead. I mean, you don't have to blame them. You could maybe look upon them as the key to change.
Well, let's make no bones about it. Shell, Exxon, Chevron, BHP, Rio Tinto, Cargill, if they go knocking on the door of Boris Johnson or Joe Biden or the EU, they're going to get more leverage than Frank Cole shouting down the microphone at you. So they have the power to put in place a much more effective, responsible maritime industry for seafarers in terms of rights, for seafarers, for the industry in terms of a green world. But for so many companies, not just them, but for so many companies, this responsibility is just lip service, or it's not done to the length and strength that it should be. We want to talk about corporate social responsibility. Well, you know what? That starts at home with the people who carry your cargoes. And that starts with the ships that you charter. And if you really believe that, then you need to deal with it. And they do not do enough in that respect. They need to walk the talk to a level which brings it to a whole different discussion level. And they have the power to move the dial.
I'm happy we found some common ground that we could agree on, so that you're not totally depressed, but maybe you could see a light in the tunnel there.
I'm not depressed at all. I realize one of the things about City, I'm not depressed. I have to be brutally honest about what I think I see. And it's you have to remember the watching the treatment of seafarers over 40 odd years. It's hard to find a bright light in all of that. It's hard to find a bright light. We got piracy. Piracy? What is piracy? Isn't that something that's in the movies and happened 200 years ago? I was working on a Danish ship back in the early 80s, and a sister ship was raided by pirates, and the second mate's wife was sexually assaulted. And here we are, 40 years later, and we still have the same problems. We still have all of this kind of nonsense going on.
You haven't thought about a political career, Frank?
A political career? Well, you know what happens when you have a political career? They dig into your personal life, and everyone has skeletons. And a political career, yeah, but what kind of politician would I be? Because I wouldn't be. No, I'd be. Everyone. When you speak up, people put you down, and you end up being, oh well, you're just crazy. But part of the consideration for me as to whether to go on in this industry is that the establishment just closes down around you, and I think we just got to try and find a way to break through that. And it can be mentally challenging to keep going. It can be mentally challenging. I've faced over the years, I've faced some pretty challenging mental times when I've felt, okay, you're just trying to, you'll come up with, or you'll close around the shop, and you end up in a place where, you feel quite challenged by it all. And then you think, is it worth it mentally? But fortunately, with a bit of coaching and a bit of psychology, you can fix it all. And then you take a break, you come back, and you're ready to talk to you and start talking about it all over again. It's this mental thing it's all around us, all these people having a go. And it must be absolutely terrible for seafarers. Absolutely terrible. So yes, I'm positive about technology. I can see a way future. I believe that charterers could make a huge difference if they really believed in their corporate social responsibility and didn't just pay lip service to it. But, they would use smart words and put their suits on and go on down the road. If they truly wanted to make a difference, then they'd give me a call and would do it in a disruptive way. But so, yeah, we've got to find a way. I'd like people to believe in changing the industry, not just for their own wallet. And unfortunately, a lot of the big corporates are, at the end of the day, they're forced into some of the corporate social responsibility, and they're driven by the bottom line or the shareholders' concerns rather than the environment or what's right for the industry or what's right for seafarers. Maybe I should just keep going.
I think you should. We will be missing you otherwise, I think. Thank you for taking the time, Frank. How about that? Thank you, Frank. I think we agreed on many things, even though we also agreed to disagree on some. For a while there, I was worried about your blood pressure. Now maybe I must worry about everyone else's blood pressure. But thank you for being frank. In the next episode, you will hear someone else speak about the same topic. How we create a fair future for seafarers. But that episode will be released after the actual day of the Seafarer. So the week after June 25th. Meanwhile, the International Chamber of Shipping, the ICS, along with industry and social partners, are encouraging ships in ports around the world to sound their horns at 12 noon local time on June the 25th, in honor of the International Maritime Organization's Day of the Seafarer, to remind the world of the urgent need to vaccinate all seafarers. So please join in on that one on June the 25th. And also you can send me feedback on Frank and his idea of a global strike for seafarers. Send it to hello@shippingpodcast.com so I can reply to you. Or maybe invite you to become a guest. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the Maritime Professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.